Hello, and welcome to episode number 5 of CXO-Talk. I'm Michael Krigsman, and I'm here with my co-host, Vala Afshar. Vala?
How are you, Michael?
It's very good to see you. Good to see you again as well. So we have a wonderful show.
Amazing show and an amazing guest.
And our guest is Mark McDonald, who is an analyst with Gartner. Mark, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Welcome, Vala. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Mark, tell us a little bit about your background.
So I'm a Group Vice President and Gartner Fellow with a part of Gartner known as Executive Programs, which focuses exclusively on CIO and business leader issues related to technology. And so we've been really concentrating on looking at kind of how all these digital technologies really create opportunities and really present challenges to organizations, not just from an IT perspective, but also from a technology perspective.
So you're working with senior execs for the most part?
Yes, as a matter of fact, just this past week I had sat down at dinner with a bunch of CIOs, and we were planning a kind of CIO CEO event to understand kind of what really is going on with digital technology and how they can identify opportunities to apply it in their organizations.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about over the next 45 minutes or so. Well, let's just dive right in. Mark, let's begin with social media, and everybody knows about social media, right? Cute cat videos on the internet.
Right.
That's social media. So when you're talking with your CIO clients, something tells me it's not about lolcats, and that there must be something more.
Yeah, no. As a matter of fact, you know, all the attention's going towards kind of peer-to-peer based social media out there in the marketplace, and that's certainly justified as there's more than 1 billion people, you know, kind of actively engaged in that. However, when we put together and did some research for a book we published called The Social Organization, we found that the most significant opportunity for social media and for social kind of mass collaboration, which what Anthony Bradley and myself call it, it really exists in being able to tap into, engage, excite the talent, the knowledge and experience of your people to really address those issues that are not really easy to address either in a formal top-down hierarchy or really kind of working side to side in terms of business processes. So if you think about it this way, the social dimension cuts diagonally through those two things and enables organizations to do things that they couldn't do any other way.
Can you give some examples? It sounds good, but it's also fairly abstract the way you're describing it.
Yeah, no, understood. So I'll give you 2 examples here. You're a multi-billion-dollar company that needs to execute a global strategy in the midst of the global financial crisis. And that was the challenge that Cemex faced, a global cement and building products company. They had done transformation before and actually were a poster child for business process-led transformation in the late 90s, early 2000s. But they recognized 2 really important things about their company starting around 2010. One was that the leadership team at Cemex was relatively new. The average age of the senior executives on the top team was less than 7 years working together. At the same time, they saw that their workforce was average age about 29 and getting younger because they were growing in developing environments. So they knew a top-down approach to strategy deployment was not going to work. And so what they did was they embarked on something they called Cemex Shift, S-H-I-F-T, and it's out there on the web. And instead of implementing strategy by giving people orders, they created 8 collaborative communities to actually say, define for us what these objectives mean: increasing sustainability, driving organic growth, improving organizational performance, making ourselves a more social organization or most social company, etc. All associated with that. And that's really what we mean by tapping into that power, on the internal power associated with employees. And what they found by doing that social media collaboration, they were able to get accomplished in weeks what normally would have taken months or even potentially a year. And they were able to change the way employees viewed themselves and the company, from viewing themselves as, I kind of work for a country and a function, to kind of saying, I work for the whole company because I talk through social media. I exchange and collaborate through social media with people from around the world.
Yeah, Mark, in your book, the Social Organization, which you co-authored with Mr. Anthony Bradley, you talk about social organizational maturity models, and you had 6 steps that you defined in the model. Can you talk to us a little bit about, the different phases as you go through, acceptance to ultimately, an optimized collaboration ecosystem?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we found related to the book was that it was most organizations, and we studied about 600 of them for the book. 600. Most organizations that are looking at social media do what Anthony likes to call provide and pray, which is you provide the social media technology out there and you pray that something good happens. And so, and at the best of worlds, you get an environment where people say, the only thing I can trade is recipes. So, I know that's safe to trade my recipe for potato salad or ribs, and the value of the company's food at the company picnic goes up. At the worst, you find people taking these things to do all kinds of purposes that wind up, kind of in the media as kind of like silly things to do. So the biggest thing associated with this to avoid provide and pray is to recognize, which fails, by the way, about 95–99% of the time, is to recognize that it is your cultural readiness and your cultural capacity for social media that actually matters. And so that's why we created this 6F framework to look at this. And the 6 Fs really are descriptors of different levels of cultural organizational maturity relative to social media. And I'll just run through them quickly and then talk about how they change. At the base level, there's what's known as folly. And that's where you view social media internal collaboration as kind of like an interesting game, but it's something that people play. It doesn't really matter to us. It's a passing fad, and the vast majority of organizations are beyond that, which is a really good thing. Other than that is fearful, where organizations are afraid of what might happen when our employees talk to each other, via social media, and the communications that's going on between them are much more visible. Now, that's probably prevalent in about 20–30%, maybe a little bit more, of organizations that are still wondering, we can't let our people solve the problems. We can't let them, talk to each other. Any time they're being spent on social media is kind of wasted time.
Sure.
The third level is called flippant, which you view it as something that's interesting, but you take a very casual or laissez-faire attitude towards it. And those first three levels are danger levels. Really, you're going to really fail, and you've got to invest in be able to get out of either seeing it as folly, fearful, or flippant to be able to move into the 3 really kind of productivity-related cultural areas, which start with formulating, which means I think about social media as part of the tool set I use to manage, so it's formulated into my strategies, it's formulated into my processes. Forging kind of moves social media into the depth of company core capabilities. So CEMEX is a really great example of that forging attitude. And then finally, at the end stage, the ultimate stage, it's what's known as fusing. And it's where you say, I'm going to take the social organization, this kind of collection of information, knowledges, relationships, exchange, and the formal organization, and I'm going to bring them together to achieve goals and statuses. And so that last forging approach says that not only am I trying to mix social media in, but social media is an essential element of the alloy, if you will, in my organization.
Now, I had just read an MIT Sloan post that referenced a study that said in 2012, 23% of Fortune 500 companies still didn't have a Twitter or a Facebook corporate account. So do you believe that for most companies we're past the first, second, and third, as you said, dangerous phases?
No, I think the last time, and we have an assessment, a self-assessment that's out there that people can take if you do a search on social organization readiness assessment, you'll be able to find the link to it. And what we found was about half the organizations were still below or in those first 3 categories. Wow. Very, very few people in folly, because it's definitely proved that it's real. But a lot of people still stuck in fearful in terms of not being sure as to what I can do or what would happen if I let people go. And to be honest with you, the interesting thing is that when the Arab Spring happened a year ago, that was a tremendous demonstration of the power of people to organize via technology. but it also told a lot of people that said, you know what, if they organize, the first thing they do is overthrow the leadership, and so that kind of helps the fearful piece going. And moving beyond that is a really big deal. And then on the other side, half of those organizations are, see themselves as having a formulating, forging, or fusing approach, which means they can start to apply social media to much more meaningful, complex, valuable, magnetic purposes, both for their employees as well as for the organization itself.
Mark, it seems like you're describing a classic change management situation, change management problem. So how do you get these organizations to recognize that the benefits of social media are sufficient, that they should therefore take the appropriate steps needed to go over, to traverse your maturity curve and get over that hump of fear? And how do you recommend that they do get over that hump of fear?
Well, there's a couple of interesting things as we've been working with firms, particularly related to social media in particular, and generally related to digital technology, which is in order to understand what it is you're trying to do with these technologies, you have to have some kind of a goal or purpose. And then you need to put just enough structure around that goal and purpose, not for the collaborative community, not for the people building the applications, not for the customers related to the applications, but actually just enough structure for the management of the organization to accept the experimentation and the execution of this. So one of the things we find in organizations that are kind of fearful, one of the most important things organizations can do is to do something as a type of social media collaboration called relationship leverage, where you actually show and demonstrate what successful, what desired social media-based collaboration looks like. So Super Value, the grocery store chain, used this approach, and so the C-level executives blogged twice a week in the social media. They happened to be using Yammer, blogged twice a week in the environment, and then their blogging started to tell people what was appropriate to talk about in social media. And then when people asked questions of the executives responses kind of cemented that notion that collaboration and social media-based collaboration was a good thing. And we've seen that. You see that in Marriott, Bill Marriott was a frequent and early adopter of this technology in a relationship leverage view. But we see that in other organizations as well, where the first thing I have to do is put just enough structure around it, which is what we spend a lot of time talking about the book, which, by the way, includes developing a business rationale for social media, but then also taking that forward and demonstrating what appropriate behavior looks like, and then over time you build experience and you kind of grow from the grassroots, from relatively simple purposes into much more complex purposes.
So let's say it's Mark McDonald and you're the CEO of a company, and it's up to you to identify a CX executive to champion collaboration. Who is it? Is it the chief customer officer, the chief marketing officer? Is it the change agent, regardless of which function they own within the business? I mean, social is not a destination. In my view, it's an ongoing journey. But is there one executive that's suited, when you think of the different lines of business, that should really champion collaboration within business?
Well, I think the important thing you just mentioned there, Vala, is collaboration. When social media has been applied to kind of delivering a generic result, like we're going to be more collaborative, that's a perfect kind of example of provide and pray. It's a provide and pray in sheep's clothing that sounds really nice, right? We're going to be more collaborative, but it's basically let's put the tools out there and see what happens. Rather than having a central sponsoring body, what we saw in the companies we studied that were successful at this is they had a formal coordinating body that kind of maintained the social media environment, kind of monitored what was going on, etc. They weren't really champions to the same extent that you have IT champions, which and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, because social should be everybody. And so the more that it comes from the grassroots, the better. And so we found and describe a process in the book of how you work from the bottom up to identify those people who are already being social, are already kind of leaders, if you will, in their collaborative communities, but really kind of the purposes around what they're driving becoming important. So, you know, at CEMEX, for example, each of those major areas had, yes, a formal executive sponsor, but their role was to really kind of, you know, provide, if you will, that just enough structure that's in the formal organization to allow the informal collaboration and value to be created. And we saw that as well as in electronic arts when they used this technology inside of their IT organizations, a real concentration on everybody being a sponsor and allowing this process to grow from the bottom up as opposed to dictating it from the top down. And I really believe, and I did a post a long time ago about this, that the nature of change itself is changing. But I think I really believe that this notion of a traditional champion who's going to go out there and push something through the organization, kind of make you do it, whether you like it or not, has really changed. And in the new change model we're seeing that's being much, much more influential is allowing the community, allowing the group to recognize and be dissatisfied with the status quo, which social media can certainly help you do that, and then making them part of solution is to say, where are we going to move towards? So we see a lot more change being driven organically in organizations from the middle and lower middle around as a basis, and really focusing on, you know, there's dissatisfaction about performance, there's dissatisfaction about things that aren't working quite well, and how do I tap into that dissatisfaction and make it a positive force? The traditional challenge was top down, was like, you're dissatisfied, I'm going to give you the answer, and, you know, take it at Lance point because I am the champion.
Mark, when software vendors talk about social media, they often talk about, and collaboration, they often talk about putting a social layer on top of their software. And what that means is connecting social collaboration to features so that they're tied to a particular business process. So, for example, so salespeople can talk about their deal and have efficiencies that way. But it sounds like you are thinking of social media as a deeper driver of more fundamental cultural transformation throughout the entire company. So from that standpoint, this social media is a lever of much deeper cultural and business transformation, not just a social layer on top of software.
Yeah, no, it definitely can be that, and I think that's, you know, why we called the book The Social Organization, not the social company or the social employee. And it's that notion of what am I coming together for, and what am I coming together to try to achieve that becomes absolutely essential. At the veneer level that you're talking about, that certainly can be very effective at generating awareness and generating attention to something. So, for example, there's a pharmaceutical company has one of their Latin American operations down in Brazil does something called Times Square, where they actually take tweets from the sales force and broadcast them like a little like messaging that revolves around Times Square inside the corporate offices, so people can see what's going on in the marketplace. That's a kind of a veneer approach. And again, if all I do is take a tools approach, I'm going to provide and pray. If I say, you know, I want to have a meaningful purpose, something that is magnetic to the individuals participating, it's the reason why they're going to volunteer their time, their attention, their knowledge, and their interest. And that purpose has a reason as to why an organization wants to allow that level of collaboration to happen and to accept the results that come from that collaborative community is really where this third dimension really comes into play. Now, a lot of organizations say that's too amorphous, it's too chaotic, it's kind of like the third rail of management. You know, I want to control things top down, or I want to control things end to end from processes. And figuring out how you provide enough structure to make this third way acceptable is really the difference between people who treat social as a veneer and treat social, you know, as a core capability or a core aspect of their culture that they're trying to build.
That's great. That's great. A little bit of a shift in the conversation to I believe, a Gartner report that was published in early 2012, talking about technology budget and spend moving out of IT and out of the control of the CIO. And at the time, it was said in 5 years. So by 2017, the CMO owning the tech budget. And certainly it's a topic of conversation. I don't think I've been to a conference lately where this particular report is not mentioned. So asking a Gartner fellow who obviously collaborates with executives throughout businesses, how seriously can we take this data in this report?
And I have to say, I've been wanting to ask somebody from Gartner about this one as well for a while. Like Vala says, every vendor out there that's involved with social tools and CIOs is using this. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's two things to be very clear about. There's a difference, and this difference has really come out as digital technology continues to move deeper into organizations, has been that there's a difference between what we traditionally think of as IT and what we think of broader as technology. And technology is certainly much bigger than IT. And so when you said, technology spend, that helps kind of position that statement in a little bit better light. Unfortunately, people are interpreting this as kind of a win-lose zero-sum budget game. If it isn't in IT, then people are irrelevant. I think the other interesting point about this, so it's not just that technology is bigger than IT, but then so much more technology. The digital technologies are lighter weight. They move into the front office. They're brand new, so they get a bigger chunk of the investment curve than other organizations do. And so you have no legacy mobile applications from 7 years ago. So it's all new. So I think that's part of the other thing about the matter. I think the final point about it is this, is that when people start talking about technology spending being run outside of the IT organization, it really becomes important to ask you, what do you mean by technology spending? So when they talk about CMOs driving a bigger budget than the CIO relative to technology, it's right in a way in terms of absolute spend. It's kind of misleading in a way because they spend on two different things for two completely different reasons. So if you're going to throw the money you pay to Google for for their advertising services into tech spend, which some of these people do, then guess what? You're right. It's going to be bigger. If you say, how much core application development, how much core operations, how much core data analytics am I going to run, then you get kind of a different answer. And so, I think there's two forces going on here besides these definitional things. One is that for the past decade, really for the last 10 years, IT has been subjected to, for economic and strategic reasons, a real decade of devaluation in IT spending, outsourcing, renegotiating contracts, consolidation, virtualization, have all been condensing the IT budget, in effect devaluing what's going on in there. The rationale, the business rationale for doing that devaluation was very, very clear and very, when you take a step back from it, really important to recognize. Name for me, in the period between 2001 and 2011, a single major technology-intensive business innovation.
Cloud?
But the cloud was being positioned as a way of managing infrastructure costs. It's only recently that the cloud's now become much more focused on a deployment and growth and scalability issue. So when there's no major technology-intensive innovation over the last 10 years, saying it ends around 2011, there's no good business reason for investing in IT beyond kind of keeping it running. Now IT and CIOs need to take the technologies that Gartner calls the nexus and recraft the new good business reason for investing in IT. And right now, much of that money, because it's oriented towards growth, is being directed by the business units and marketing departments that are responsible for growth.
So is everybody spinning this report? Meaning everybody, are technology vendors? Is there? It seems like a whole courtship movement towards the CMO and the CFO, and a little bit less towards the CIO. Is the industry or the misinterpreting the data and the report from Gartner?
Well, I'll say, since we're being recorded and will be rebroadcast later.
This is just
We can shut it off for a few seconds.
Just a few of us, among
No, I know. It's just a casual conversation. I will say that people will use information to their best advantage. But I think clearly what we're seeing in this move between the CIO and the CMO and the relationships that are between there, which is a focus of a lot of people's attention, really is reflecting that deeper move to technology going into the front office, technology being responsible for driving revenue, and IT kind of being responsible still in the back office. And so,
did consumers...
one more second. The fundamental question that CIOs, CMOs, and CEOs have to answer, at least in the next 5 years, probably for the next decade, is how will technology support growth? The question we've been answering for the last 10 years has been, how will IT control cost? And so that when you have that fundamental shift in the major strategic question related to technology, you're going to get a new set of relationships.
But to answer that question, though, it means that the people who are in control of technology from a deployment perspective and a funding and allocation prioritization perspective, by definition, need to be coming out of the business.
Well, they don't. No, not necessarily, because recognize 3 really big things happened in the last 6 years that I don't think people have really paid attention to. Vala, you were starting to talk. You're going to bring up the C word, the consumerization word, right?
The C word, yes.
Yeah. So Mike, as you were talking about that, it's consumers that now are driving and being a driving force in technology strategies that organizations have to respond to much, much more than they've ever been before. And so, somebody once asked me, how strategic is technology to my business? And they were describing their situation, and they said, our consumers, our customers are pulling us into this. Well, guess what? That's all the definition you need. If your consumers, if your customers are pulling you into these environments, it is by definition strategic, because what is of interest to my customers has to be a fascinating thing for me.
Right, but okay, but Mark, this, I'm sorry for interrupting, but this,
no, it's okay.
But this, what you're saying though, implies that the decisions on where to invest these technology dollars have to be coming out of the frontline business people and not out of the people who are responsible for maintaining systems and who are trained in technology development and maintenance, but rather who are trained and live with the business, customer-facing business folks.
Right, and so, but you know what? In reality, all of those business requests have always come from the business. And many organizations, over this decade of devaluation have kind of tuned up their governance and tuned up their financial management to make sure that there's no project, that old adage, there are no IT projects, there are only business projects, reflects that that's true. I think if you view this as a zero-sum game and you say that CIOs were predominantly, were the predominant drivers of initiating business spend on technology, and now that's changed, that's true. It's kind of changed to everybody.
How can it not be a zero-sum game, though, Mark?
Because here's the interesting point. When you're talking about back office automation and operations, every dollar I put one place is a dollar I can't put someplace else. Digital technology, and we talk about this a lot in the Digital Edge book that came out, when digital technology is tied to revenue, I get the opportunity to grow investment as the business grows. And that's one of the other big things that's really changed is technology is now responsible, on industry average, about 26% responsible for driving and generating revenue itself. Online or digital revenues are about $14 billion. No, actually $14 trillion or something like that in the economy. 14% of the total economy now happens online. And that's radically different than the way we've thought about applying IT to back office problems where I had a resource scarcity mentality. If I'm able to grow the business by digital technology, if I'm able to grow the margin with all that revenue and the leverage that is inherent in this nexus of forces, then it begets more investment. And I think that's a very important but very subtle management change that's that leaders have understood and are adopting.
So from the business point of view, though, it's the business people that are driving these decisions. And so just coming back to the original question that Vala asked about that
Sure.
number, so it seems to me, if we net it all out, the answer is yes, the technology investment decisions are coming out of the business, whether it's marketing, which is very prevalent today, or other line of business, and technology as infrastructure is going, those budgets will be declining over time as we gain greater efficiency. So the answer is yes, whether the numbers are right or wrong, we don't know.
Well, the answer clearly is that it's more pronounced, and hopefully it's jointly done. But yeah, I mean, technology investments should always have a good, solid business reason or business rationale for them.
Sure. So can you maybe shed some light on the difference between digital strategy and IT strategy? Are they different? Should the CIO view each separately, and then how? And if so, how does that relate to perhaps relationship between a CIO and CMO? What would you advise a CIO to do to not only bolster relationship but also be able to develop a digital and IT strategy simultaneously?
Okay, so I think one of the things that a lot of people are spending an awful lot of time with right now and are, engaging in a kind of interesting discussion is they're talking about having digital strategies. And the digital strategies I've been, honored, to review are, by the vast majority of cases, an e-commerce strategy warmed over. So they took the words e-commerce and they substituted in digital, and all of a sudden they got this brand new strategy. And you see it with a focus exclusively on channels. You see it with this, concerns about disintermediation, etc. And so I think there is a technology strategy. And I think that technology strategy really does answer that fundamental question: how will technology support growth? Or in a public sector environment, how does technology support our mission, to deliver constituent services, etc.? And from there, you get a set of decisions. I think when you start to separate out strategies and you say, I've got a marketing, I've got a go-to-market strategy, I've got a digital strategy, I've got an IT strategy, you wind up investing money in multiple places for the same basic purpose with no realization of how technology is continuing to work. And what I mean by that is I can easily invest in separate strategies, in separate infrastructures. I can invest in a marketing infrastructure. I can invest in a digital content management infrastructure. I can invest in an IT infrastructure. And where we're seeing leaders going with this is they're replacing infrastructures with platforms. And the best example of this is Amazon. Amazon is a commerce platform, and they'll run any product set over the top of it, that makes the most sense for them to do, but they manage that platform as technology, not as its individual components, at least from what we can tell. And other leaders in this area are recognizing that it is counterproductive. It actually works against the path of development of technology, which is, getting to much more, cloud and services based, and, is becoming much more platformed in its own nature, to kind of say, I've got this separate but equal set of strategies.
If we go back to the maturity curve that you were talking about before, what you're describing right now, the integration of strategy across all these different parts of the enterprise, seems like this is pretty advanced stuff for many, if not most, companies. You're kind of talking in ideals here.
No, actually I'm not. When we did the Digital Edge book, we looked at organizations, and I think this also comes from what the nature of digital strategy really needs to be. I think here's why it isn't. Most of the executives that are in organizations today lived through the dot-bomb era. And so I really have to say this, is if you're going to go back and dust off your old e-commerce strategy, then you didn't learn anything from that whole internet craze era, etc. And so I think we've got an
palpitations thinking about it.
Yeah, I think we've got an opportunity for executives to really demonstrate to people kind of, how much they understand and how much they're able to work. Now, the other thing about it is this, is when we looked at, these real digital leaders like the Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines or the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles or United Stationers or CDW, what we found was their strategy was not based upon a top-down view of the world, but rather based upon a very simple set of goals or outcomes that they were building technology to do. Now, and this is inherent in the nature of digital technology itself. And so, when you've got hospitals and resellers and wholesalers and distributors and cruise line companies, that kind of quote unquote understand this and say, I'm going to set up a goal and objective, and I'm going to let the digital technologies build and accumulate and accrete to help me achieve that goal and objective, because I'm going to learn as I'm going along. I can't get it right, but as I get more of it, I get better at it and I get more capability. Really does point to a sign to say that we can look at digital technologies differently. Just one final example. We featured a case study in our 2013 agenda report of a company called Multiquip. It's an equipment equipment seller and rental company out in California. $350 million worth of revenue. They trade globally around the world. An IT department of less than 50 people. The
Wow.
CIO decided that he was going to learn and build a mobile application, and so he took the forms that are associated with signing a contract, renting equipment, and made them available via an iPad app. Relatively simple application, but really proved what could be done in that digital technology. And then that led them to really developing what in their industry has been a market-leading set of mobile apps, iPad and tablet-based apps. Wow. That's the kind of thing we're seeing where people are winning, where we're seeing people, and it's still early days to actually see them quote-unquote fail. Sure. But where we're seeing people that are kind of, I'm going to put a big budget down on digital, I'm doubling down on digital. They're creating a traditional top-down, very heavy approach to what is essentially a very light, combinatorial, exploratorial, agile, rapid response, high velocity environment, and I think they're going to be really challenged to do that. Sure. So it's not theory. We've got people that are doing it in practice, and it's in practice in the public domain.
Right. Well, we're starting to hear more and more. I mean, every day I'm reading a different post where you see the term Chief Digital Officer, and and certainly your posts have been, your recent set of blogs have talked about, do you even need a Chief Digital Officer? Where should the Chief Digital Officer report? There are 4 different types of Chief Digital Officers that organizations need, and you had an axis that talked about revenue and innovation and other dimensions. Is this really the hottest C-suite title, or is this just a fad?
Oh, no. Well, I guess 2 questions. Yes, it's the hottest CC title that's out there. Whether or not it's a fad, I think is something we'll talk about in a second.
Sure.
The interesting thing is that whenever there is a new, major, significant, technology-intensive business change that goes through an organization, there always is a desire or a requirement to define a position called the czar of it, the chief process officer, the chief security officer, the chief whatever, to be able to do 2 things. One is to create a single responsibility center, which inside the organization makes some sense, and the other one is to create somebody to sell to. And so there's a lot of vendors out there who are actually advocating chief digital officers because it gives them somebody to call on. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. What I think's really interesting is when we did the work on the Digital Edge book, we went into about a dozen companies really, really deeply to understand it. Some of them had chief digital officers, and some of them didn't. And the primary distinction between those who didn't need a chief digital officer and those that did was the way the senior executive team worked. If you have a senior executive team that can effectively partner with each other and effectively make commitments to each other, so in the case of Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, the CIO and the head of hotel operations were responsible for digitizing the Oasis-class ship, the world's largest cruise ship, where there are no lines, and that's because of the way they digitize the business. In other organizations, when I'm trying revenue to that channel and to these set of resources, then I probably more likely need a chief digital officer. Or if my senior leadership team only works by appointing one person as to be the point man for something, then it probably does make sense to have a chief digital officer. But chief digital officer by default is a simplistic way to look at things. Now, sorry.
No, please, go ahead.
So now the question then comes is are all chief digital officers created or cut, I should say, from the same cloth? And the answer to that is definitely not. If your chief digital officer's job description was basically to take the chief strategies officer's job description and replace the word strategy with digital strategy, that's much, much different than I'm going to set up a chief digital business officer who I'm going to tie revenue to. And so the two dimensions we use to kind of help understand kind of what these different types were whether or not that person, that chief digital officer, is going to have revenue responsibility or policy responsibility. In other words, do they actually have to bring money in, or are they kind of coordinate and define what digital means for that organization? Both laudable goals, neither one right nor wrong. And then what's the resources they have to deliver those responsibilities? Right. Do they have line resources, meaning they in effect are a business unit or an aspect of a business unit, or are they staff resources that are kind of in corporate headquarters? And from those things, you've got basically 4 different types: a chief digital business officer, who's got revenue responsibility and line resources to deliver it. You get a chief digital champion, who may have line resources but more of a policy focus. You get a chief digital strategist, who may have policy focus with line resources, so they're kind of setting the policy in that lower quadrant. And then you have a chief digital marketing officer who has revenue responsibilities but is delivering those responsibilities in coordination with staff resources. So they're laying out the marketing plan, etc. If you have a P&L, you carry a direct P&L relative to digital, you're a digital business officer. If you carry a marketing plan and an overall business goal, growth goal, but you don't control the resources required to deliver that, you're probably a chief digital marketing officer. If you're responsible for defining what digital means to the business and how it makes the company more competitive, you're probably a chief digital strategy officer. And then if you're responsible for increasing the use of digital resources in your organization, you're probably a chief digial champion.
So you're a guy who thinks in terms of diagrams, aren't you?
Yeah, oh, wonderful diagrams. Wonderful diagrams.
No, well, a 4-quadrant diagram is a job responsibility at Gartner.
Right. So, but there's got to be tension if there's room for another CX level, and it's a CDO. There's going to be some natural tension with the CIO and CMO, and perhaps even the CFO, don't you think?
Absolutely. And one of the last blog posts I did on chief digital officers is where they might actually report to. And again, it comes back to kind of what's the goal or intent you have with digital technology. I think the fundamental thing, to come back to whether or not this is a fad, I think the fundamental thing that we've seen from companies that do digital really well, and we're talking about traditional companies, not necessarily just startups or high tech, right, is that they recognize that digital solutions, the value that they create and the revenue that leads or flows, if you will, from that value comes in combination, as opposed to being either in substitution or in isolation. And so e-commerce was largely practiced as an isolation strategy. I set up a separate e-commerce channel, certainly from 97 to 2000. I set it up in isolation. It was a different channel. It competed with other channels. That's an isolation strategy. From 2001, really up until about 2008, we spent a lot of time cleaning up that mess and started substituting, kind of traditional assets for digital assets. And that's where you got the rise of e-books and more complex e-stores and digital content migrated on the, in music and other industries. And all I was doing was I didn't really change the business model. I just changed kind of the way it worked. Where we're seeing organizations do things is in recognizing the combination of information, physical environment, physical resources, equipment, behavior, and skills to achieve a particular outcome. So for example, at Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, it's a very simple story that I tell a lot, but it's very illustrative of this. They eliminated lines at restaurants simply by telling the passengers how full each restaurant was. Right. So I gave the customers the ability and control of their own experience, the information that was gathered through digital technologies, and they reached an outcome by themselves. That is like the trifecta of digital strategy.
That's awesome.
So when you talk about, earlier you mentioned the cruise lines were digitizing, or I guess digitalizing might be the right way to say it,
sure,
the business. Just as we kind of close out here, give us just a brief example of what do you mean by that?
So when, I'll put it this way, when you take a physical item and you extract the information from it and you kind of work with that extracted information, you're digitizing. All I'm doing is I'm turning atoms into bits. And if you remember back in 1997, Nicholas Negroponte wrote this really great book called Being Digital. Well, most organizations have already done that, and in reality what they do is they feel digital. So if you're using ERPs and you're using integrated collaborative tools, and you've got automated data exchanges between customers, you really feel digital, right? Because you got all this technology around. What we argue going forward is actually being digital is using those resources to create sustained sources of value. And I'll come to an example in a second. So it's not just how I extract or pull the two things apart, but then how do I put them back together again to create and resolve contradictions and create a unique opportunity. I'll give you a very, very simple example that hopefully many of the people watching this might have some experience with. There's a company outside of Chicago called CDW, and they're a reseller of computer equipment, and they've got but they've been a digital leader for a very long time because their goal and outcome was to figure out a way to provide high-touch customer service in a commodity-based market. And even in their founding, they realized that the small SMB marketplace needed more support, but they weren't going to get it from their resellers and their suppliers. So they've used digital technology to really, if you will, amplify the performance of their account executives, to give them a full view of the customer, integrating all 21 customer interaction channels to really be able to give them highest possible services in a very, very low margin business. That's the kind of contradiction that really digital technology is excellent at doing. So for Royal Caribbean, the contradiction is, world's largest cruise ship, no lines. At Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, the goal was the elimination of information as a source of patient harm when they moved into their new digitalized, which is really changing the business model, business. And it's those kinds of things that we see as really being what's exciting and really describing what's really profitable, in digital technology, while everybody else is out there talking about what's possible. And you know what? Everything's possible. The very set of small things that are actually profitable for you are much, much smaller and much, much more accessible than you think.
Great.
So Mark, in closing, advice to CIOs and CMOs from someone who I consider to be the top fellow and analyst at Gartner.
Oh, Vala, you're very kind, but I think the advice is really this. I can generate a lot of sparks, and certainly the CMO and the person who's the chief digital officer, is responsible in some ways, or gets rewarded or measured by the sparks they generate. I can't turn that spark into a flame, and I can't sustain and grow that flame without having a scalable, very capable platform. And that's what the CIO brings to the table. The most powerful combinations we've seen is the combination of the CMO and the CIO working together with a shared goal to grow the business. And what's very, very important about it is when my goal is to grow the business, everybody has the potential to win. When my goal is to control cost, there's automatically a system of winners and losers. Mm-hmm. So if you're not thinking about how technology will support growth, and you're not partnering to generate the spark and to develop and provide the environment where that spark turns into a flame that illuminates your position in the marketplace, that generates heat with your customers, that generates results and energy for your organization, then you've got to start doing that very, very quickly. So that would be, in a single nutshell, the single biggest piece of advice I would offer.
Wow, thank you so much, Mark. This was fantastic. I learned a lot.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to convert this show to a 1,000-word blog in Huffington.
I know.
But it's amazing.
So we want to thank the senior analyst and Gartner fellow, Mark P. McDonald, for joining us today. Mark, we're really grateful for sharing your wisdom and your expertise with us. And we have some really interesting CIOs and CMOs coming up. We have Kim Stevenson, who's the CIO of Intel.
Yes.
And we don't have a date yet set, but we have Casey Coleman, who's the CIO of the General Services Administration.
Right. Absolutely. Working with folks at SAP to get some of their executive teams here, and certainly
Becker, who's their Chief Marketing Officer.
SAP
absolutely. Will be on the show.
Mike Fawcett, Vice President at IDC.
Yeah.
So great show. And Mark, I'm telling you, it's amazing, amazing amount of insight in the first in this hour.
The Celtics, don't forget the Celtics.
Oh, the Celtics. We have the CIO of the Celtics and Hall of Famer Jojo White joining us. So
talk about leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
that's great.
So as we close out, but one thing has been on my mind all during this week, and now this might be slightly awkward, but there's this rumor out there that you're not real.
Oh. What does that mean?
That means, well, it's a couple of things. Mark, back me up on this, right?
Okay. We're not going to end the show like this. I was on such a high. I was so...
all of these tweets,
I'm not real?
All of these tweets, how is it possible? Are you scheduling tweets and not telling us, Vala?
I am just trying to create a spark and generate heat and bring value to my customers.
Touche, touche.
But the other thing is, Vala, you're too nice. You're always nice, right, Mark? I mean, he's always.
He's very accommodating and a wonderful person to be associated.
And I think there's something wrong with that.
I will work on it.
All right, and with that, again, a warm and hearty thank you to Mark McDonald for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And Vala, as always,
thank you, Michael.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure.
And everybody, have a great week. Come back next Friday, same time for CXO Talk. Bye-bye.